Hey guys, welcome back to the MCU HQ. In anticipation of Spider-Man No Way Home, I am going back and reviewing all three Tobey Maguire Spider-Man films, as well as both Andrew Garfield Spider-Man films. On Thanksgiving, I put out my review of the original Spider-Man, and a couple days after that, I put out my review of Spider-Man 2. It is now time to review Spider-Man 3. So if you missed either of my other reviews, go check those out. There's a playlist in the description box, so you can go see both of those, and that'll fill up with more Spider-Man reviews as we go. And also, after this, I am going to release the supercut, which is all three reviews seamlessly put together, because I recorded that one first, so these reviews are actually that video spliced into 3 pieces. So if you just want to wait and see it all in one sitting, you can hang out for a few days and I will have the supercut up on the channel. Also, stay tuned for the Andrew Garfield reviews. Those will be out just in time for No Way Home also. So guys, here we go. Let's get into my review of Spider-Man 3.
This could be the end of Spider-Man.
So if Young John had reviewed this movie, Young John would give this movie an A+. Young John loved Spider-Man 3. Adult John does not love Spider-Man 3. But before we talk about that, let's just talk about how perfect the poster for the movie is. They just don't make them like they used to. It's a hell of a lot better than whatever this is. Yes, Spider-Man 3 is a mess. There is no denying that. It's a movie that would have been just as amazing as the first 2 movies in the trilogy if Sony did not interfere with it to add Venom and try to sell more toys and appeal more to kids. But they did, and we got Spider-Man 3. And the studio interference in this movie was so bad that Sam Raimi was nervous to come back and do Doctor Strange 2 because of what he went through on Spider-Man 3. 14 years later, and he was still afraid of working with superheroes. Sony, what did you do to the poor man? But I do not hate Spider-Man 3. I actually have started to appreciate it more. I went through a period there, because I loved it when I was little, then I went through a period where I was like, this movie isn't good. But now I've started to appreciate it more and more and what it was trying to do, and as much stuff as it did wrong, it also did a lot of stuff right, and I think that in a way it is a very worthy and satisfying conclusion to the trilogy. I cannot get into the good stuff in Spider-Man 3 before I mention how much shit is in this movie. Peter wants to propose to MJ, and then they start having relationship problems, and then Harry gets in on the mix, and there's this very creepy, possessive love triangle, and then you have Peter's ego starting to take hold of him, and he'll do stuff like kiss Gwen Stacy in front of MJ and not think there's anything wrong with that. And then Sandman comes onto the scene, and it's revealed that Sandman was the one who actually killed Uncle Ben. So now Uncle Ben's story is relevant again, and now Peter has a revenge plot. But Sandman also is only a bad guy because he was trying to get money for his daughter, but Spider-Man has to stop him. And then you have the symbiote in this movie that literally just spawns into this movie with no setup, lands on Earth. So you get the entirety of the black suit storyline from start to finish. So Peter becomes a dick, he gets the black suit, and with the black suit comes Venom. So then Venom comes into this movie for the last 30 minutes so that he can be the final boss. But then there's another villain in this movie because Harry Osborn discovers his dad's lab at the end of the second movie and becomes the new Goblin in this movie. And then he gets amnesia at the start and then has to fast track his arc from the first 2 movies inside of this movie so that he can become a villain again, get his ass kicked again, then become a hero, then die. That's a lot of stuff in a 2-hour and 19-minute movie. Now let me tell you the plot lines I liked in this movie. Peter's storyline, him having a New York-sized ego, I think was a smart play going with that. I think that worked. Could have been cooler if they were able to devote all the time to it, but they couldn't. The movie starts not with Peter swinging through New York, but with Peter watching video of Spider-Man swinging through New York, and then talks about how much people like him, and then his first on-screen line in the movie is telling the kids to wait so it can start over. I also like Sandman. Sorry. I really like Sandman. No. I love... Still not there. That's it. Sandman is the redeeming aspect of this movie, and if he wasn't in it, this movie would probably be like a D-. But luckily, Sandman is in the movie, so the title of Worst Spider-Man Film does not go to Spider-Man 3. No, it doesn't go to you either. Every time Sandman's on screen, I'm emotionally invested, and the best part about Sandman is that he's not a villain of his own making. He is a villain because the American healthcare system sucks. And Sandman has one of my favorite scenes in the movie, which is the morning after he turns into sand and he's trying to find the locket and he's trying to grab it because his daughter is all he has. And the score in that scene. Danny Elfman did not return to finish the trilogy. Apparently he didn't have the best time on Spider-Man 2. So instead they brought in Christopher Young to score this movie, and he did great. He wrote some great music that fits very well with Danny Elfman's style for the first two movies, so it seems like continuation, not like a composer change. I always forget it was a different guy. And the Sandman theme is fantastic. And the sound effects are really good. As I mentioned, the CGI gets better every movie. And besides the fight with New Goblin, where they're like going through the alleyway that looks really bad, the CG's pretty good in this movie. And the movie retconned the death of Uncle Ben to have Flint Marko be the one who killed him. Was that necessary? No, it was not. Will I get over it? Yeah, because I get what they were going for, and I appreciate it just because of how the movie ends. It ends really well. We'll talk about the ending. And Sandman's the only villain in this trilogy that gets to live, so that's a title none of the other characters and none of the other villains in this trilogy got. But Sandman ain't the only villain in this movie. And that's my issue with this movie. Because if it was just Sandman and then Peter's ego, wow, this would be a really good movie. And Sandman should be the only villain just because of how critical he is to the main theme of the movie, which we'll get to. And the other villains just take the focus away from Sandman, which sucks because he's the best character in the movie. All right, Venom. Venom is a villain I like. Not in this movie, though. So the symbiote randomly lands on Earth like it's a Transformer. And the fact that this movie and Transformers came out the same year makes that really bad joke work better. And then it attaches to his little motorbike and hangs with him for about like 45 minutes, just sitting there, before it decides to attach to him and give him the black suit when he's at his lowest low, which is a cool little tidbit. And I will say that the reveal of the black suit is a really good scene. But then Peter becomes a bigger dick than anyone could ever become. And then Peter becomes a bigger dick than he already was, and he starts like dancing through the streets, and he goes to a jazz club with Gwen Stacy just to make Mary Jane jealous. And I'm gonna be real, that's the last I'm talking about that. And oh yeah, Gwen Stacy was in this movie. People just kind of leave the movie at certain points and come back, and Gwen Stacy's one of them. But then Peter punches MJ, which is a jaw-drop moment, and then realizes how big of an asshole he is, so he goes to a church and he tears the symbiote off him, and it lands on Edward Brock Jr., who is down below and had just finished asking God to kill Peter Parker, when from the heavens a black goo came and then gave Eddie Brock the power to kill Peter Parker. So I guess he got what he wanted. And then Eddie becomes Venom. And here's the thing. I get what they were going for with Venom, but bad casting decisions aside, this is not a good Venom. Thing is, so they wanted Eddie Brock to kind of be the anti-Peter Parker, but the issue is that that's what the point of symbiote Peter Parker is, so I don't know why they then had to do it again. If you took Venom out of this movie, it's the exact same, because without the symbiote, you still get a Peter Parker who's a dick. So the only thing that would change if Venom wasn't in this movie is that the movie would be a lot better. And about Dick Peter Parker, so the idea is that Peter's been Spider-Man for a few years now, and everyone loves him, and his ego is starting to get him, and he starts to put himself first a lot of the time, and that leads to him doing things like kissing Gwen Stacy in front of MJ because he doesn't realize what's wrong with that. You know, this is Peter Parker. He was never popular. Now he is, and he thinks that this is perfectly normal behavior and that people are fine doing this. But speaking of MJ, her arc from the second movie is just absolutely nuked in this movie. The ending of the second movie was about her saying that she is fine dating Spider-Man, and she's fine with all the baggage that comes with being in a relationship with Spider-Man. And then this movie starts, and she's like, I hate being in a relationship with Spider-Man because the whole world revolves around Spider-Man. And then there's everyone's favorite character, the New Goblin. When I was little, I liked New Goblin. I thought New Goblin looked cool. He doesn't. The New Goblin starts the movie as a villain because he thinks that Peter killed his father. And then he fights Peter like almost instantly into the movie. It's really quick, which is a good way of knowing there's too much stuff in your movie. But then Peter clotheslines him, and I think Harry hits his head like on 8 different things, gets amnesia, so he forgets being enemies, and he's friends with Peter and MJ again, but then he gets his memories back, and now he's New Goblin again. Basically, they benched Harry the entire movie because they had Spider-Man and Venom, so they were like, well, if we just get rid of Harry for most of the movie, we could focus on Spider-Man and Venom and then bring Harry back. And it's pretty clear this movie was supposed to be just Harry and Sandman, and Venom screwed everything up. So when Harry gets his memories back, he then decides he's gonna have a hand in screwing up the whole Peter and MJ thing. And so he forces MJ to break up with Peter and say that she fell in love with Harry. And the rapey vibes are not suitable for children. And all MJ had to say was, hey Peter, you kicked his ass before, kick his ass again, and then mission accomplished, we can go home. There are so many characters in this movie that, as I mentioned, they will just leave the movie for long periods of time. They'll leave for like 45 minutes, then come back later. Gwen Stacy sees Peter at the dinner he has with MJ, then leaves, and then comes back for the jazz club scene. I always forget Sandman is in this movie after Spider-Man beats him in the sewer, and then he shows up like an hour later and then just absolutely just clobbers Venom. And then Harry gets hit in the head, leaves the movie for a bit, gets hit in the head again, and leaves the movie for a bit, then gets hit in the head a third time, stabbed through the back, and then leaves the movie permanently. I don't hate the movie, though. I honestly don't think it's as bad as people say it is. And it has, I think, what might be my favorite moment of the whole trilogy. Now it's time to talk about the final battle of Spider-Man 3. The final battle is stellar, but I don't like that Mary Jane is a damsel in distress for the third time in the trilogy. It was fine in 1, it worked for the story. I don't know why she was a damsel in distress in 2. She was only kidnapped in 2 so that she could learn Peter was Spidey. And you know what? That's a great moment, I'll let fly. Why is she kidnapped in 3? I know that the original plan for the movie was to have Gwen Stacy get kidnapped and Peter and Harry had to save her. Why didn't they just do that? Was it just so they could have MJ there when Harry died? I don't know, but I didn't like it. And Kirsten Dunst didn't either. She refused to do the screams, so they had to take audio from the first and second movie. They had to take screams from those movies to put in this movie. But I digress. So Spider-Man goes after her when she's taken hostage. And can we talk about 2 scenes that Little John did not like? It was the scene when he lands in the sand pit and it just starts growing and just keeps growing. I was kind of scary. And then the scene when Venom and Sandman beat up Spider-Man, I didn't like. Before Captain America lifted Mjolnir, we had New Goblin coming to help Spider-Man. So it's a 2-on-2 fight. You got Spidey and New Goblin. I'm gonna stop calling him New Goblin. I hate the name. You got Spider-Man and Harry versus Venom and Sandman. And I think there's some really cool stuff in here. First of all, the takedown on Sandman is great. I love how many creative things there are in the fight with Sandman. Like when Harry uses the thruster to turn Sandman's arm to glass and then he shatters the arm. And the little horror movie bit when Sam Raimi goes back to his roots, the horror movie bit where Venom is screeching and Spidey's trying to find him. For anyone like me who was confused way back when, the reason that Peter can't detect Venom is because when Peter had the symbiote, it adapted to what he does. So when it went on to Eddie, it knew his tricks, so it can't get detected by Spidey sense. So Peter had no clue where the hell Venom was. That's so cool. I wish I was in the movie. It would have taken one line to mention that. And of course, Harry's death. Harry's death is great. And it's so poetic that Norman and Harry both died the same way, but Norman died trying to kill Spider-Man while Harry died saving him. It's like he made the Goblin name a heroic thing, not a villainous thing. The movie has 4 endings, 3 of which are for each main villain of the movie. And each of them have to do with forgiveness. That's the theme of the movie, by the way. As mentioned, the movie wanted to do a Peter versus Dark Peter storyline with Venom. If Peter has great power and great responsibility, Eddie has great power but none of the responsibility, and so he's not willing to let go of that power and he gets vaporized for it, right? He didn't get forgiveness, he didn't seek it, he didn't give it. There was no forgiveness in Eddie Brock's future, so he gets a brutal death for it. The scene when Peter forgives Sandman legitimately makes me want to cry. They just don't make him like they used to. Sandman doesn't want forgiveness, he just wants Peter to understand, but Peter forgives him because Peter needs it, because as Peter said,
I've done terrible things too.
And that's one of my favorite lines in the movie. And then with Sandman forgiven, he gets to fly off into the sunset peacefully, not aggressively. And that brings us to Harry. He gets to have this moment with his friends. And he and Peter hated each other in this movie. They both tried to kill each other at one point. But Harry isn't gonna die with that on either of their consciences. So it's just incredible. It's just such a good ending.
Should never have hurt you. Said those things. None of that matters, Peter. You're my friend. Best friend.
And then Harry gets to die not as a villain, but as the hero who saved Spider-Man. And it's done to the backdrop of a great piece of music and one of the most beautiful shots in the trilogy. And then there's a funeral for Peter, and not including the song MJ sings, because I don't count that, these are the last lines of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy.
It's the choices that make us who we are. And we can always choose to do what's right.
That's the other theme of the movie, by the way. But the movie isn't over. There's one more ending. There's the Peter Parker and Mary Jane ending, because that's not been wrapped up yet. Well, Sam Raimi knocked that out of the park too. It's not a heroic ending of Spider-Man swinging through New York with music blasting. It's a much more personal ending. Because this isn't the ending of a Spider-Man story. This is the ending of Peter Parker's story. Peter walks into the club where MJ works. She's singing, and he's in the first row. And then she comes down, and she dances with him. And the last shot of the Spider-Man trilogy is the two of them dancing. Sorry that I went into that deep of a talk about the ending. I just love the ending so much. I had to talk about it given the opportunity. Spider-Man 3 has a lot of issues. I mean, a lot of issues, but it has enough good that I still think it's a worthy conclusion to the trilogy, and I am going to give Spider-Man 3 a C+. Now, this is a hot take, but I really do not want Spider-Man 4, because I feel like Spider-Man 3 ended not just the movie perfectly, but the trilogy perfectly. At the very end, he gets the girl. The girl that the whole trilogy's been about.
This, like any story worth telling, is all about a girl. That girl. The girl next door. Mary Jane Watson.
There you guys have it. There's my review of Spider-Man 3, and that concludes my reviews of each Tobey Maguire Spider-Man film. As mentioned, the supercut will be up in a few days, and then I'm going to be diving into the Andrew Garfield films. So what did you guys think of Spider-Man 3? What did you guys think of my review? And what did you think about my analysis of the ending there? Let me know all of that down in the comments below. Also leave a like on this video, subscribe, click on the bell icon so that way you get notified when I drop my review of the amazing Spider-Man films. That's going to be it. Have a great day, guys.